The decontamination chamber smelled like ammonia and bad decisions, and Reyes had been in both before. She stood with her arms out while the scanner array circled her 6 articulated arms, each one ending in a different sensor cluster, each cluster humming at a different frequency. The combined sound was a chord that existed in no musical tradition she knew of. She had been standing in this position for 11 minutes. The Dravathi technician at the console had not looked at her once. Her translator implant misfired on the intake form. She caught biological hazard designation when it should have rendered species classification and intentional contamination risk for what was almost certainly personal effects declaration. The implant had been calibrated at Proxima Station 3 weeks ago, which had apparently been 3 weeks too long ago for Conclave standard vocabulary drift. She filled out the form anyway, based on what she could infer from context. If she was wrong, someone would tell her. That was how these things worked. Usually. The scanner arms folded back. A panel opened in the wall, and a Dravathi escort stepped through tall, bilateral symmetry. Skin that shifted color in the infrared range, though you needed goggles to see it. The escort wore no name tag. It wore a function sigil on its collar, something between a pentagon and a chevron that Reyes's briefing materials had identified as mid-tier administrative. It pointed at her bag. That object, the translator rendered, with a half-second lag that made every sentence feel like a warning, is flagged as threat class portable. She looked at her bag. It was a canvas satchel from a market stall in Nairobi. It had a broken clasp. "It's a bag," she said. "It is flagged. What threat does it pose?" "Unknown. That is why it is flagged." She handed it over. The escort took it with 2 fingers, as if the canvas might be contagious, and placed it in a secondary scanner. The scanner ran for 4 minutes. It returned the bag. The escort did not apologize. That was probably also how these things worked. The conclave main chamber was a volume of space the size of a modest stadium, arranged in concentric circles of delegation platforms that descended toward a central dais. The ceiling was transparent. Through it, the gas giant that the station orbited filled approximately 40 degrees of sky, banded amber and rust. A storm system the size of Earth's Pacific, rotating slowly in the upper atmosphere. Reyes had been told the view was considered sacred by 3 of the 14 species present. She had been told this in the same briefing that noted her delegation seat was 0.4 kilometers from the main table. She found it by following the escort through 9 corridors and 1 gravity transition, a section where the station's rotational axis shifted and the floor briefly became the ceiling, and then the floor again. She took it at a walk. The escort had paused to watch her do this. She didn't know why. Her seat was behind a low partition, in a gallery that appeared designed for observers rather than participants. The chair was sized for a human, which meant someone had planned this in advance. She sat down. She could see the main table, distantly, across a stretch of open floor that was not technically a barrier, but functioned as one. A Dravathi senior arbiter materialized at her shoulder. Not literally, it had walked up while she was reading the room, which said something about either its stealth or her attention. The human delegation, it said, holds observational status during this session. Votes registered under observational status are recorded, but carry no procedural weight. "Who assigned us observational status?" she asked. "It was determined during the pre-session administrative review." "Who conducted the review?" "The administrative body." "I'd like to speak to them." "The review is concluded." The session begins in 40 minutes. The arbiter's function sigil was higher tier than the escort's. She noted that. She also noted that it had not given her its name, or anything like a name. She pulled out her notepad, actual paper, the kind you could buy at any train station in the world. Spiral bound, 80 pages, and wrote down what she knew. Observational status, 0.4 kilometers from table. Pre-session administrative review. No names offered. She wrote in Spanish because it was faster than English for her, and because no one else here would likely read it. The Dravathi arbiter had not left. She could sense it still standing there. She looked up. "Is there a problem with the notepad?" she asked. The arbiter's chromatophores shifted in a pattern she couldn't read. "You are recording?" "Yes." "With a physical substrate?" "Yes." "Why?" She thought about that for a moment, because it was actually an interesting question. "Because I think better when I write by hand," she said. "And I need to think." The arbiter left. She went back to writing. When she finished the page, she looked up at the main table, the real one, with its 14 delegation platforms, and its ranked seating, and its procedural screens, already cycling through agenda items, and she read the first item on the agenda. Ratification of the Galactic Peace Accord, preliminary vote, all delegations. She underlined all delegations in her notepad. Then she wrote in the margin, "Which species drafted Article 7? She would ask that out loud in 40 minutes. She was curious what would happen to the room when she did. Article 7 said the colony worlds would be transitioned. The word was doing a lot of work. Reyes had read the full accord text during the transit from Earth, 6 days, cramped bunk, recycled air that tasted of aluminum, and someone else's coffee. The document ran to 912 pages in the human standard rendering, though the hegemony claimed the original was 60 pages and everything else was translation artifact. She had read all 912. She had flagged 43 clauses. Article 7 had 11 flags, which was more than any other single article by a factor of 4. The language was beautiful, in the way that language designed to obscure meaning is always beautiful. Transitional sovereignty protocols. Phased demographic recalibration. Voluntary resettlement incentive structures. 3 colony worlds. Combined population. 4.3 million humans. The accord gave them 18 months. She filed the challenge at 0714 station time, 12 minutes after the session opened, and 7 minutes after the presiding arbiter read the agenda aloud. The challenge was not simple. It could not be simple. The conclave's procedural rules were a sedimentary record of 1,200 years of interspecies negotiation, and anything simple enough to file quickly had been litigated out of existence generations ago. So she had spent the 6 transit days doing something else with her time, besides reading the accord. She had mapped the procedural architecture, 17 distinct subchannels, for formal objections. Each subchannel keyed to a different species' legal tradition. Each tradition with its own standards for what constituted a valid challenge. She filed 17 versions of the same challenge simultaneously. Each one was correct for its subchannel. Each one cited the Minority Petition Clause Charter subsection 4.7, which allowed any delegation, regardless of procedural status, to formally contest an agenda item before ratification if that delegation could demonstrate direct material impact. 3 colony worlds. 4.3 million humans. Direct material impact was not a hard argument to make. The chamber went quiet in the way that large spaces go quiet when everyone in them stops talking at the same time. The presiding arbiter's console lit up with 17 simultaneous challenge filings. It stared at its screen for 4 seconds, she counted, and then it said something in its own language that the translator rendered as a color rather than a word. Vorkan, the hegemony delegate, stood up. It was a species she had only seen in briefing images, and the images had not captured the way it moved fast for its mass, with a fluidity that suggested its skeletal structure was different than it looked. It was large. It moved to the front of the hegemony platform and addressed the chamber. The human delegation holds observational status. It cannot file procedural challenges. Charter subsection 4.7 does not specify voting status as a prerequisite, she said, from 0.4 kilometers away. Her voice carried because the chamber's acoustics were designed to carry voices, even inconvenient ones. Vorkan turned toward her. From this distance, She could not read its face. That was fine. She wasn't trying to read its face. Subsection 4.7 has not been invoked in this chamber, it said. I just invoked it 17 times. The session suspended at 0731 for archival verification. She was informed by the presiding arbiter that the suspension would last approximately 3 hours, while the conclave's legal archive confirmed that subsection 4.7 was an active clause and not a procedural fossil. She used the time well. The conclave station corridors were not designed for socializing. They were functional, utilitarian, lit at the frequency that suited the most species simultaneously, which meant Reyes needed her filter lenses because the result was slightly greenish and gave her a headache without them. She walked the long route back toward her observational seat, and she stopped at every delegation's anteroom she passed, and she knocked. Not all of them answered. The Kethsaro delegation opened the door and closed it in 8 seconds, which she counted as a partial success. The species she couldn't identify from her briefing materials, scaled, tripedal, wearing what appeared to be woven gravity compensators on all 3 limbs, invited her in and offered her something to drink. She accepted. It tasted like very cold licorice. She said so. The tripedal delegate made a sound she couldn't interpret and offered her more. She learned 11 names in 3 hours. Not function sigils. Names or the nearest equivalent each species had to the concept of an individual designation. Some were sounds. One was a gesture. One was a sequence of color shifts she photographed with her implant camera and planned to practice later. The Dravathi arbiter Sul Eighth watched her do this from across a corridor junction. She had noticed it there for about 20 minutes before she acknowledged it with a nod. It did not nod back. She wasn't sure if that meant it hadn't recognized the gesture or was choosing not to return it. She walked back to her seat at 1022. The archival verification had concluded. Subsection 4.7 was active. The session would resume. Vorkon found her in the corridor at the last junction before the chamber entrance. It was alone, which she noted, because hegemony delegates typically traveled with at least 2 function staff. Your petition will fail, it said. The translator had no lag on Vorkon's speech. It had probably had its implant calibrated recently. Probably, she said. She kept walking. The accord session reconvened at 0300 station time, which meant nobody had slept, which meant everyone was making mistakes except Reyes, who had stopped sleeping more than 4 hours at a stretch at 26 and had spent the subsequent decade making peace with that. She was back in her observational seat when the Kethsaro delegate's atmospheric suit alarm went off. The alarm was a high-pitched cycling tone that cut through the chamber's ambient noise like a blade through foam. Everyone heard it. The delegate, a species she had read about in her briefing but not yet met, bilateral but with their sensory clusters concentrated in their lower torso rather than their head, was 3 platforms to her left and considerably closer to the main table than she was. The suit alarm meant suit failure. Kethsaro were ammonia breathers. Atmospheric suit failure, for a Kethsaro delegate, had a medical outcome that her briefing materials had described in language designed not to use the word fatal while meaning it. The chamber froze. That was not a metaphor. Every delegate on every platform went physically still, because the conclave cross-contamination protocol was explicit, and all of them had been trained in it. In the event of atmospheric containment failure, all biological entities were to remain stationary until the medical response unit arrived and established a safe perimeter. Movement risked spreading contaminants. Movement was forbidden. Reyes crossed the floor in 11 seconds. She knew the protocol. She had read it. She crossed the floor anyway because the protocol was written by people who had never watched someone suffocate. And she had, once, in a construction accident outside Bogota when she was 22, and the memory was the kind that lives in the body rather than the mind. It lived in her legs, apparently, because they were already moving before she had consciously authorized the action. The The suit breech was at the right shoulder seal. She could see the hairline failure in the composite gasket, the faint haze of atmospheric mixing around it. She pulled the wax binding strip from her notepad. It was the kind of wax that booksellers used on handmade notebooks, dense and tacky, and she pressed it over the breech with her thumb and held it there for 30 seconds, while the delegate made sounds that the translator was not rendering as words. "Breathe with me," she said. She did not know if they could hear her, or if the translator was working for them, the way it wasn't always working for her. She breathed slowly and loudly enough that the rhythm was audible. In for 4 counts, out for 4 counts. She held the seal and breathed and counted. In, out, in, out. The haze around the shoulder stopped spreading. The seal was holding barely, imperfectly, a 30-credit piece of bookbinding wax on a 6,000-credit atmospheric suit, but holding. The delegate's sounds changed. Still not words the translator would render, but different sounds. She held the seal for 40 minutes. The med drone arrived at minute 7, but establishing the safe perimeter took until minute 31. And she stayed, because releasing pressure on the seal before they had proper equipment would undo everything. Her thumb went numb at minute 20. She switched to 2 fingers. Her forearm began to cramp at minute 35. She did not move. The med drone locked a proper clamp over the breech at minute 41. She stepped back. The cross-contamination screen went up. She was technically in a restricted zone, which meant she had violated approximately 12 conclave safety statutes in the past 41 minutes. Sulaith was standing at the edge of the screen perimeter. She could see it because the screen was transparent. It was watching her. "I know," she said, though she wasn't sure it could hear her through the screen. "I'll file the paperwork." The Keth Saro delegation requested a 24-hour recess at 0347. They did not explain why. The Keth Saro. Earth called her at 0600, not to ask how she was doing. She was in her assigned quarters, a functional room that had been configured for human sleep requirements, which meant a horizontal surface and approximately 21 degrees Celsius, and she had not been sleeping. She had been reviewing the legal language around subsection 4.7 and writing questions in her notepad. The call light on her implant went amber, and she accepted it. The deputy secretary's voice had the flat quality of a person who has decided what they are going to say and rehearsed it twice. "Commander Reyes. I'll be direct. The situation has changed. Coming. Reyes." She had heard those words before, in 3 different jobs, and they always meant the same thing. "The hegemony has communicated directly with the Security Council," he continued. "They've indicated that if the accord isn't ratified today, the 3 colony worlds will be reclassified as uncontested territory, effective immediately. The Council has reviewed the situation and determined that we cannot risk an armed confrontation over a legal challenge that is unlikely to succeed." "It will succeed," she said. "Commander, the Keth Saro delegation requested a recess. That is not nothing. That means something shifted. The Council's decision is final. You are directed to stand down and return to your quarters pending transport." She looked at the ceiling. It was a beige color that was probably meant to be soothing. It was not. "I'll file an acknowledgment," she said. She did. She filed it correctly, time-stamped and properly formatted, through the right channel, 7 minutes after the call ended. Then, she put on her jacket and walked to the conclave chamber. The Keth Saro delegation was already there. All 9 of them, which was unusual. Typically only 4 attended open sessions. They were standing in a rough semicircle near the entrance, and when she walked in, they stood differently. Their sensory clusters reoriented toward her. It was not the same as looking at someone. The Keth Saro sensory apparatus was distributed across their lower torso, but it had the quality of attention that looking has. One of them made a gesture she hadn't seen in her briefing materials. It was specific and deliberate. both upper limbs extended forward. Palms the flat joint surface that served the function of palms facing up. She had seen a gesture like that before. In 12 separate Earth cultures, with minor variations. It meant, "You have the right to speak here." 7 of the 14 delegations were watching. She counted as she crossed the floor. She didn't go to the observational seat. She walked to the main table. She pulled out the chair that had a placard reading, "Human Delegation," the proper seat, the voting seat, the seat that Earth's government had just told her she no longer had authority to occupy, and she sat down. She opened her notepad. Sul-8th's internal designation for her had changed. She didn't know this. She would never know this. But in the 47 seconds between when she entered the chamber and when she sat at the main table, the Dravathi arbiter had accessed its own behavioral taxonomy and found no entry that matched what it was observing. It had accessed secondary taxonomy. Then, tertiary. It had finally created a new entry. The first new entry it had added to its personal taxonomy in 19 years of arbitration work, and the entry was a Dravathi term that had no translation in any other language because no other language had needed it before. Something that might be rendered, imprecisely, as the thing that does not understand that it has already lost. Vorkon entered the chamber at 0742. It crossed to the hegemony platform and stood at its edge, looking at her. "You have no authority here," it said. She didn't look up from her notepad. She had learned, in 11 years of this work, that looking up was something you did when you were surprised, and she wasn't surprised. "Neither did the people who wrote Article 7, she said. "Let's talk about that." The chamber went quiet. Outside, through the transparent ceiling, the gas giant's storm had completed nearly a full rotation, 31 hours for one revolution, patient and enormous and entirely indifferent to what was being decided below it. Reyes turned to a fresh page in her notepad and wrote the date at the top. Then she waited for someone to speak.